Carol, right back. And I'm glad Norma mentioned that because we have representatives here today of three of the branches of the Vifquain family from, well, the General's sons. And maybe I should ask Rudge Vifquain to stand. Rudge, if you would stand. Rudge is from Lincoln, and his wife Dottie. Rudge is kind of our family patriarch. We go to him for advice and information through the years, and certainly, Rudge, we appreciate you being here today. Then Rudge would be descended from the line of John Vifquain. John Vifquain, General Vifquain. And Valerie Cole and her husband Rob are here today. Valerie and Rob. Rob has the camera all the way from Utah, and they are descended from John also, Victor Vifquain's son. Kirk Vifquain. Kirk, if you would stand with your wife Jan from Lincoln, another Lincoln family, and they are descended from the first son, Victor. And of course, Reg and Dottie's daughters, if they would stand with their husbands, their daughters, Terry and Brenda, and their husbands are with us today. And one more. A family I just met, a couple, and known them for probably go back 40 years or more, but Gene and Maxine Phillips are here today. And Gene is my mother's cousin, and Gene would be descended from Elmer's branch of the family, which is mine.
From Alliance, Nebraska.
From Alliance, Nebraska, right? Come a long way. So welcome. I hope I haven't missed anyone. Thanks also to Jan Selleck. I know Jan is here today, and the last time I saw Jan was in November of '94. Beautiful November day at the cemetery, Calvary Cemetery in Lincoln, when we dedicated General Vifquain's Medal of Honor stone. So that was quite a day. Well, let's talk a little bit about General Vifquain, and it's truly my honor to do that every time I have the opportunity. Maybe we could best describe him as a pioneer, patriot, hero, romantic, man of action and daring. All of these things, I think, fit the description of Victor Vifquain. Someone once wrote of him, "Great events make great men, and exceptional circumstances call forth colorful, energetic individuals to make their contributions as leaders. Such was the case with Jean-Baptiste Victor Vifquain and his participation in the American Civil War. A soldier by temperament and profession, he was recognized for his bravery and gallantry in a number of major campaigns, where he rose to the rank of general and became the first Nebraskan to win the Medal of Honor. He was also instrumental in one of the most intriguing behind-the-scenes events of the war, a plot to kidnap Jefferson Davis. Following the war, he played an important part in the transition of the Nebraska Territory to statehood, a leader in the state Democratic Party, published a major newspaper, served as the state's adjutant general, held diplomatic posts, and led the 3rd Nebraska Regiment to Cuba during the Spanish-American War. Only a versatile, multifaceted man, pioneer, patriot, and statesman could have packed so many accomplishments into one lifetime." And so let's begin by showing some slides of General Victor Vifquain's life, some snapshots of his life. But before doing that, if I could ask Eric just to give us a little view by way of video of a scene back in November of 1994 when we dedicated General Victor Vifquain's Medal of Honor marker, and the gentleman, Sonny Wells, gives a good description of the general and his many attributes.
Very commonly called the incorrect name, the Congressional Medal of Honor. In truth, the Congress has nothing to do with the awarding of a Medal of Honor except in extremely rare cases. We are with one today who, in receiving the Medal of Honor, was a pure, dedicated military man. Quite the contrary, this Saturday at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, we will be putting a Medal of Honor marker on the grave of a man who enlisted 4 times using 2 different names, had 3 desertions, 1 court-martial, and was eventually killed by Wild Bill Hickok in a barroom brawl. So this one is really different. We're talking about a pure, honest military hero in this case. To give you the value of the Medal of Honor to one who is in the military, George Armstrong Custer once said he would trade all of his rank and military brave to have received the Medal of Honor. His brother received 2. George never received one. And George Patton once said he would trade his immortal soul to have received such a award. He also never received the Medal of Honor. Assisting in the program today, and you'll have to pardon me if I have to turn this over, will not be Charles Hagemeister, who got called to Alabama and evidently couldn't make it back. Bishop Fabian W. Bruskowitz, and I hope I did that right, has already offered the invocation and will also do the benediction. Dr. Jeffrey Smith is a great grandson of the honoree, and he is here with several other members of the family. Jan Stellick is a researcher in Saline County, Nebraska. We first met her when we were doing the Jefferson Coach story, the gentleman who we did in Dorchester, who had both eyes shot out but yet stayed in the Battle of Gettysburg for 4 hours. Joe Acamo, did I do it? Oh, I have trouble with Joe's name. He is Major and Field Commander of the 1st Nebraska Volunteers. He is in charge of the volunteers, the reenactors that are here today. The Reverend Everett Briley is President of the 1st Nebraska and will give the period dedication. Captain of the Artillery Battery, which some of you people on this end may want to talk to him when this is all over, is George Schultz of Kearney. The initial part of the program was done by the Daughters of Union Veterans of the Civil War, 1861 to 65. I will give you some of the names. They're just very well represented here today. Judy Fromm is President.
94 when we dedicated the General's Medal of Honor marker at Calvary Cemetery. And of course, this is, I think it's my favorite photo of the young handsome Frenchman who is our ancestor, and of course, your first son from Saline County. Born in 1836 in Brussels, Belgium. Of French parents, and his father, an interesting individual, an engineer, Jean-Baptiste Joseph, took his training in engineering in Paris after the Napoleonic Wars, but was awarded the Legion of Honor by Napoleon himself, as the elder Vifquain served in the Napoleonic Army. Here was an award given to him on the 150th anniversary of his death, so he was one of the leading engineers, architects, and urban planners of Europe during the 19th century. Developed some of the integrated rail networks in Europe, and also some of the first iron bridges. And so one would think perhaps that his son, Jean-Baptiste Victor Vifquain, might follow an engineering career. In fact, the younger Vifquain had an idea of going into the Navy, but his father really wasn't too fond of that. And so Victor Vifquain came to America at the age of 16. He allowed him to come here with a friend to kind of look around, and it was probably because of his father's ill health that the young Vifquain returned home. But he did go back to Belgium, received his military training, and was given the rank of second lieutenant of cavalry. But he yearned to come back to America, and no doubt it was because of a young lady that he had met here by the name of Caroline Buellmans. And when Victor Vifquain returned to America, he went to Tipton, Missouri, where the Buellmans lived. They had come up from New Orleans, the New Orleans area, and it was there that Victor Vifquain and Caroline were married. And it's kind of interesting, we were there last summer to Tipton, Missouri, and this is the grave of Caroline's father, John Buellmans, and her mother, Teresa. And to this day, there are Buellmans still living in that central Missouri town of Tipton. But the young couple had ambitions to go elsewhere. They weren't going to stay in Missouri. And in the green springtime of 1858, they came to Nebraska and became the first European settlers in what would be Saline County. This is from an edition of the World Herald back in the 1960s that shows General Victor Vifquain as the first settler of your county. And so they came to the West Blue River. Settled. Beautiful scenes here. That one big river that's so familiar to you. So a lovely area he chose. And got into farming, cattle ranching. But their only neighbors, at least for the time being, were in the Pawnee, the Sioux, the Kiowa. And they were 75 miles from the nearest post office and store in Nebraska City. So it was a lonely existence that first year or two out here in the county. But before long, war came, as we know. Just 3 years after they came here, the Civil War broke out. And Victor Vifquain wanted to put his European military training to work to help his adopted country. By then, 2 sons had been born to Victor and Caroline. Victor, Emmanuel, and Elmer Francis. And so, not waiting for a regiment to be formed in his own state of Nebraska, Victor went east. And he joined a New York regiment, the 53rd New York, made up of Frenchmen like himself, so-called Zouave regiment. And this is an example of their fancy dress, their baggy pants, their short waistcoats, their kepis, their hats. And so the 53rd New York, or Depanol Zouaves, as they were called, got into the action of the war very early. They took part in some actions off the coast of North Carolina, but by the same token, the 53rd was what we call kind of a hard luck regiment. Because of desertion, deaths, and the grounding of one ship off the coast of North Carolina, the 53rd, like many Civil War regiments, was dissolved. So it was simply mustered out of action. And Vifquain, like many others of the 53rd, found himself kind of at loose ends. He didn't know really what to do with himself before he could get into another regiment. And so he and a couple of captains from the 53rd New York came to Washington, D.C. In early 1862. And this is the unfinished dome of the Capitol, as it was during the Civil War. And they met with another Frenchman. So 3 Frenchmen met with another Frenchman by the name of Maurice de Beaumont, who was of aristocratic lineage. And de Beaumont had some interesting contacts. He was related to a Confederate general by the name of Polignac, who at that time was in New Orleans. But the 3 of them got together, and as some would assume over a glass or 2 or 3 of good Bon Rouge, they dreamed up a plot to kidnap the president of the Confederacy, bring him back to Washington, and end the war in a hurry. This is Civil War written. So if they could somehow get there by hook or crook, capture Davis, bring him back, they would end the war. And it's really a romantic tale of daring. And Victor Vifquain, of course, chronicled all of this in his memoir, Linked from a Broken Chain, which for years was called Archives of the Nebraska State Historical Society. And so to Richmond they went. And this is a look by way of a sketch of Civil War Richmond. And their goal, of course, was Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy. And this is a picture of General Polignac, who was related to that individual by the name of Mr. Beaumont. And so they first of all went to Alexandria, Virginia. They checked into the Marshall House using the names. Interesting. Here you have these three young Frenchmen, all in their mid-20s, very daring and handsome. They used the names of Dumas' three characters from the Three Musketeers, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. And it was Vifquain who took the name D'Artagnan, Gascon soldier of fortune. So they actually checked into the Marshall House using those noms de guerre. They then took a train to Manassas, commissary train to Manassas. By the way, Porthos, one of the three, had injured himself. Cleaning was done, he returned to Washington. So there was now just Vifquain and the two friends. This is the railhead at Manassas. This is a map from the book that I just edited, the 1862 plot to kidnap Jefferson Davis, that shows the route of the three Frenchmen from Washington down to Richmond. Quite a tale of adventure as well. On the way, interestingly, near a place called the Quiet Creek, they were captured by a Confederate patrol and taken to the headquarters of no less than Colonel Lee. This was the nephew of Robert Fitzhugh. Take a look at these three Frenchmen. When they were first brought to camp, these men accused them of being Yankee spies and close to Lee questioned them for a while. I think he somewhat believed them, but just to make sure, he sent them on to Fredericksburg, where they would then be reporting to another Confederate officer by the name of Gustavus Smith. Smith really didn't like them very much, didn't trust them, and so Smith put them on a train and sent them to Richmond. There they would spend a little time in Libby Prison. This is the famous Libby Prison in Richmond, Virginia. So your son of Saline County, Victor Vifquain, was off on quite an adventure as he and the two other French officers, Thomas, was imprisoned here, accused of being spies. And this is General John Winder, who was the provost marshal of the city of Richmond. This is the famous capital, of course, of Richmond, that the three Frenchmen must have seen as they looked out the windows of Libby Prison. And interestingly, Jefferson Davis was named after Thomas Jefferson. He was born the last year of Thomas Jefferson's presidency. So another view of that famous architectural masterpiece of Thomas Jefferson. Something else that the Frenchmen, Vifquain and his associates, certainly must have seen as they would later walk the streets of Richmond, Capitol Square, with the statue of George Washington above. Here's the Spotswood Hotel, where many Confederate meetings took place, and the higher military and the Confederacy would meet here. Basically, the story comes to this. The three were not charges that they were spies and horse thieves, simply couldn't be made to stick. They were released, they walked the city, they roamed the city for a couple of weeks, and they tried to come up with a way to capture Jefferson Davis. What was the best way to do it? And finally, Vifquain had the idea of getting aboard a steamer that carried Davis down from Richmond to the city of Norfolk once a week. It would go down there to check on how the rebuilding of the Confederate gun runner Virginia was coming along. And if the three Frenchmen could find a way to get aboard that tug, perhaps they could overcome the crew, capture Davis, and then bring him to a Union port. That was the plan. But the war, unfortunately, the events of the war would scuttle that plan as Norfolk would be captured, as Yorktown would be captured. This was all during the time of the Peninsular Campaign, And eventually, the three would have to give up their hopes of getting aboard that car, capturing Davis, and so they would be forced to get some horses and scurry back to Washington. This is the city of Norfolk as it appeared early in the Civil War, about that time, April, we're talking about April and May of 1862. And of course, it was just a month before that that the Monitor and the Merrimack had their famous duel in the Hampton Roads, near the Norfolk area. And so it was back to Washington. They made it through Virginia, back to Washington, and this is Nathaniel Banks, Union general, who welcomed them back, and the three then proceeded to Washington. It's all told in a book that I was fortunate enough to edit with another Civil War historian by the name of Philip Tucker, with the title The 1862 Plot to Kidnap Jefferson Davis. So this basically contains the memoir of Vifquain. It's linked from a broken chain that resided for so long, as I said, in the archives of the State Historical Society. So quite a tale of romance and adventure. The three Frenchmen went different ways, though. One would join a Union army, fought at Gettysburg. He was killed. Another, de Beaumont, went back to France, where he was killed in the Franco-Prussian War. But Vifquain, our hero, went west. And armed with a letter of recommendation from Edward Stanton, the Secretary of War, Vifquain went to wartime Springfield, Illinois, where he would join an Illinois regiment, the 97th Illinois. This is Governor Richard Yates, who had the command from Lincoln to put together 46 regiments. And the 97th Illinois would be one of those. They trained at Camp Butler outside of Springfield. And they would become part, really, the 97th would have the number of important campaigns in the war. The first was the Vicksburg, where Vifquain and the 97th would stand out. Vicksburg, of course, on the Mississippi, high on a hill, would prevent basically the Union from controlling the Mississippi and splitting the South. As long as Vicksburg held, the Union was somewhat held at bay. And so the 97th would become part of a number of battles. One of them was Chickasaw Bayou, above the Vicksburg Bluffs. And the 97th, part of Sherman's army at the time, would be defeated. They would get nowhere in time to take the city. They next became part of John McClernand's Army of the Mississippi, as he called it. They would go up the Arkansas River and capture a fort by the name of Fort Inman, or Arkansas Post, under the leadership here of Naval Captain David Dixon Porter. And at the time they would storm Fort Inman. In fact, the 97th Illinois would be the first inside the fort, and as a result of this battle, Vifquain would be promoted to the rank of major. And interesting, right after this battle, it was February of 1863, a very interesting letter of Richard Vifquain, where he writes to Lincoln and notes to his Excellency, that European fleet on this salutation, in which Vifquain comes up with the idea of putting together a regiment of blacks. Not the 1,000 or 1,200 man regiment typical of the day, but as many as 2,000. And it would be more on the European line. Of course, he signs it, Victor Vifquain, Major, 97th Illinois. We don't know what came of this. No letter from Lincoln back to him has gone on, but it was an interesting idea. Long before some of the other black regiments in the war were formed. But eventually, Vicksburg would be taken. And Grant came up with a marvelous plan, of which Vifquain and the 97th Illinois was a big part. They crossed the Mississippi. What they did was to come at Vicksburg from around and behind. So they crossed the Mississippi below Vicksburg, and then they would take a number of Confederate forts like Fort Gibson, Champion Hill, and before long, they would find themselves right outside the city of Vicksburg. Lincoln himself called Grant's campaign the most brilliant in the history of warfare. And so on that national holiday, July 4th, 1863, the city of Vicksburg fell just a day after the Battle of Gettysburg. There's Grant riding through the city of Vicksburg, victorious. So a long and deadly campaign. And this is the Illinois Monument in the Vicksburg Military Park, modeled on a Roman Pantheon. Dome look, and among the 38,000 names of Illinois soldiers engraved inside is that of Victor Vifquain. Then the 97th was sent south near New Orleans for more action. So Vicksburg was stationed down the Mississippi, where they participated in a number of battles, Narragansett Bend, the Atchafalaya River. It's kind of the tail end of what they call the Red River campaign. On one occasion, Vifquain, in fact, was, you might say, lent to another general, Stephen Burbridge, who used him for some reconnaissance work. And Vifquain captured a Confederate cannon, dragged it across a bayou, and was lucky not to have been killed, wounded, much less killed in the act of doing it. The city of New Orleans in 1863, 1864, there's the famous St. Louis Cathedral in the background, and Jackson Square, the statue. And so the 97th was there for a few months, but in time they would get ready for their last campaign of the war. This was the one that would win Vifquain his Medal of Honor, the campaign against Mobile. It was put together by, all of the work was done by Edward Canby, Union General. And the city of Mobile would be a tough one to take. It was started by about 300 cannon, 10,000 men. Remember, just a few months earlier, the outside fortress, some of the outside fortresses of the city had been taken on the island, and the blockade runners had been taken in tow by Admiral Farragut when he said, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." But the city of Mobile still held out. There's Fort Morgan, the outer edges. But Vifquain in the 97th would be part of a campaign that would take them to a place called Lake Lake, just a few miles north of Mobile. They would be attached to the divisions that would come across the panhandle of Florida, eastward to Alabama, just above the city of Mobile. And there, on April the 9th, 1865, the last day of the Civil War, in fact, Lee had already surrendered the ground. The war was over. But at 5 o'clock in the evening, on April 9th, 1865, there we see sketches of Vifquain. Vifquain would raise his sword and say, "Forward, 97, charge." So they would storm the Confederate redoubts at Blakely, and this is Vifquain's own map of it from the official records of the Civil War, the battlefield. And this is a later sketch of it from Harper's Weekly, the last major charge of the war that comes in Blakely. This is a scene of the battlefield later. For his gallantry that day, April 9th, Vifquain would win the Medal of Honor and be the first Nebraskan to receive that. Blakely is an interesting battlefield today. We've had the pleasure of being there a couple of times where they have reenactments of that famous battle, of which Vifquain was a major part. Beautiful Spanish moss around the trails, about 8-10 miles north of Mobile. And that's redoubt number 4, the fort that Vifquain in the 97th captured that day. Vifquain by now was colonel and was head of the 97th Illinois. He was the commander of the 97th Illinois. And he had one other mission, you might say, for his division or his regiment was to leave Mobile. he had another chance at capturing Davis. He was sent north up the Alabama River to a place called Marion Junction because there was word that a train carrying Jefferson Davis, who was escaping from the burning city of Richmond, might be on its way, and perhaps Vifquain could get there in time to capture it. Well, they were held up by a Confederate patrol, and by the time they got there, the train carrying Davis, if it was indeed, was no longer to be captured. But in the meantime, Vifquain's men tore up the tracks at Marion Junction. They burned the station, and it's interesting that Vifquain's fourth son, Blakely Marion, would be named after these last two actions of the Civil War, the Battle of Blakely and Marion Junction. And this is Vifquain's mustering out paper. So July of 1865, the war is over, and the 97th Illinois mustered out in Galveston, Texas. Listed above, of course, some of the many battles that he participated in. But he had one more. So he had one more job to do before it was back to Illinois and then back to the plains of Nebraska. Canby gave Vifquain the order to go to Nacogdoches, Louisiana, and capture the last Confederate general who was holding out. Parole him and his men. And this is Edmund Kirby Smith. Kirby Smith was captured, paroled by Vifquain, and so he was the last Confederate commander to lay down his arms. And then it was back to Illinois, up the Mississippi, to the city of Springfield, where Vifquain would give his famous farewell address to the 97th Illinois. I'll read a little bit of that to you later. Vifquain really had a way with words. He could coin a phrase, and you might say he had a Frenchman's appreciation of his adopted country. So we'll read a line or two from that later. After the war, the next year, 1866, Vifquain was made a citizen of this country. These are this is a copy of his citizenship papers, 1866. So he's finally a citizen of his beloved country. Interesting, though, a couple of months later, before he really got back to the plains of Nebraska, he did have a little side adventure. Vifquain, along with a number of other Union officers, developed quite an anti-British bias. And Vifquain and a number of them joined the Fenians. And the Fenians were an organization, quite violent at times, who were pledged to free Ireland from British control. This would either come from attacks in England, Ireland, or hitting the British through the back door, invading Canada. An interesting idea. Vifquain would be a part of the Fenians who went to Ireland. And actually, he spent some time with a number of other Frenchmen in England, laying out some plans, and then he went to Ireland. We're told he barely avoided capture by the British at this time. But one of his friends is a name familiar to you, John O'Neill. And John O'Neill was that radical, eccentric Irishman who came from the East, and O'Neill was part of the Fenian brigades that attacked Canada. They failed miserably. In fact, O'Neill actually did a 2-year stint in prison for his trouble, but really dedicated to freeing Ireland from the British. So this is his tomb in Holy Sepulchre Cemetery in Omaha, his monument, a beautiful monument put up by the Irish Nationals. And of course, Vifquain and O'Neill were close friends. It says to perpetuate the memory, this monument was erected by the Irish Nationals. Later on, O'Neill would go on to found what we think of as Irish cities and states such as O'Neill. Vifquain in his late 30s, and with his family here. John and two Vifquain's right, General Vifquain's right, his son Victor, the oldest son, buried of course here in the cemetery, creek to the general's left, Elmer Vifquain, and around sons John and Blakely and the daughter. So the family of 8. And Vifquain would be in so much that is going on back now in the Nebraska territory, and he would be a large part of seeing the territory stable. Vifquain would be called to the Nebraska Constitutional Convention in Lincoln, be a member of that Constitutional Convention in 1871 that helped shape the state's constitution. He would be close friends with a number of notable Democrats such as James Morton and his close friend William Jennings Bryan. And he would be a trailblazer also. He would bring settlers into the state, into the Republican Valley. And interesting, along the Kansas-Nebraska border in Harlan County, the city of Orleans was named by Vifquain, has a very French flavor too. And then later he would take a party of Frenchmen out to present-day Chase County, and there they had the idea of forming a settlement around present-day Frenchman's Fort. So very active as still a pioneer, a trailblazer, an assessor, all of these. Later he would move to Lincoln, and he would start one of the more popular newspapers in the state, the Daily State Democrat, and that he would publish for the next 5 years. And later, we have a document here, he would be under a Democratic President Cleveland, sent to Columbia in Panama, where he would be a consul general, a diplomatic part of his career. This is a medal given to Vifquain, the Order of the Double Dragon, by the Emperor of China for saving some Chinese merchants from a government-imposed monopoly. So quite an honor for General Vifquain. But war would come again, the Spanish-American War, and once again he would find himself in blue uniform. So in 1898, with the sinking of the Maine, Vifquain was one of the very few Civil War officers to participate in the Spanish-American War. Here we have a typical Nebraska soldier's kit from the Spanish-American War. Interestingly, Vifquain was somewhat of a prophet. Way back in 1870, about 30 years before the war started, Vifquain, at home, my home, Saline County, Nebraska, tells why, in his opinion, Cuba should be free from the Spanish. And he likens it to how the French helped save America, the colonies, back during our revolution. So he says, why not save Cuba from the Spanish? An interesting picture. This is from the Omaha World Herald, May of 1898. Here we see General Vifquain on the steps of one of the buildings. This is Fort Omaha. So we see Vifquain here. Here we see Colonel William Jennings Bryan, who was to become commander of the 3rd Nebraska Regiment. This tall gentleman is Governor Bolton, and this is General Berry, who lost an arm during the Civil War. So there they are pictured at the time of the Spanish-American War. And this, of course, is the great fair that was held in Omaha during the year 1898. It was celebrated the 100th year anniversary of that. And the exposition that was held there would feature Bryan and Vifquain marching through the fairgrounds, the 3rd Nebraska. But Vifquain would soon take command of the 97 because William Jennings Bryan would give it up for political reasons. He wasn't getting enough political capital out of the war. McKinley wouldn't give the 3rd Nebraska enough publicity. And so Brian would resign his command. Victor Vifquain would take command of the 3rd Nebraska. Interesting picture here, taken in 1898. This is Colonel Bryan, but this is Fitzhugh Lee. Remember back in 1862, Fitzhugh Lee was that Confederate colonel who had captured Vifquain and the Frenchmen. In the meantime, Fitzhugh Lee was one of the few Confederate officers who participated in the Spanish American War. So no doubt he had forgotten what had happened back with Vifquain. This is Camp Columbia in Cuba, where Vifquain and the 3rd Nebraska were camped. They really got there too late during the action. The war was well and purposes over, but they saw the surrender of the Spanish and the lowering of the flag over Havana, over Morro Castle in Havana Bay. A wonderful picture of General Vifquain, of course, equestrian with here at the San Six-Column saddle, this taken in Cuba. And the officers of the 3rd Nebraska, Camp Columbia, and there's General Victor Vifquain, right in the middle there. Picture of Vifquain in later life, probably 1902, 1903. And of course, he died in January of 1904. And quite a story on him in the Omaha World Herald a couple days later. Noble soldiers, life went out, and tap sounded for General Victor Vifquain. So really a full page on all of his exploits, mentioning his attempt to capture Jefferson Davis early in the war. And of course his wife Caroline. So many talk of General Vifquain, but her life, in fact, should be told, because she was a noble pioneer lady who kept things together back home. General Vifquain was off fighting wars and many other things, but she died in 1926 in Lincoln at the age of 86. Quite a life when you think about it. From the pioneer days already into the modern era. Radio and automobiles, so she saw so much.
You know what? We decided she was the real general. Anybody who can raise 8 kids on the prairie, that is the
Good point. I think most feel that way. This is the Vifquain home in Lincoln, 1401 D Street, still stands today. Picture taken probably back in around the time of the First World War. And of course, the headstone of the General's first son, Victor Emmanuel, here at the cemetery in Creek. He died, he preceded General Vifquain in death by 2 years, and Victor Vifquain attended the funeral of his son, who died at typhoid in Ohio and then brought back to Creek. And the Vifquain window, Victor Emmanuel and his wife, their window at Sacred Heart Church here in Creek. Their son, lately Marion, the General's 4th son, who died in 1945. He was the individual we mentioned earlier, named for the General's last 2 battles, engagements of the Civil War. And General Vifquain's beautiful headstone, Calvary Cemetery, Lincoln, Nebraska, and of course the Medal of Honor marker that was dedicated in 1994. Dates of his life, 1836 to 1904. 97th Illinois. After his death, he was honored by so many organizations such as the Military Order of the Loyal Legion, Medal of Honor, as you know, is in the State Historical Society Museum in Lincoln's 15th and Keys. The parade ribbon. But again, the first Nebraskan to be so honored. The letter he received, according in that honor. His Colt, his Navy Colt, that's in the museum also. His spurs. Currently on exhibit, along with his medal, with the State Historical Society. And of course, then it was November of '94 that we dedicated the Medal of Honor marker. And a number of Civil War groups were there. I was honored to get a brief talk. We were just about to unveil the marker with some reenactors there. And there's the shot we saw earlier in the video with the Archbishop of Lincoln and Jan Stella. And some of the Vifquains, good photo taken that day. This is Russ, who's with us today. John Vifquain, who lives in Omaha. Elaine, who lives in Ames, Iowa. And Sue, who lives in Colorado. Quite a representation of the family. Good picture of the general in the later years. And I think that takes us pretty much through his life, at least by way of some slides. Maybe I could read just a couple of quotes from General Vifquain. I said earlier he had quite a command of the language. He could turn a phrase with a Frenchman's beautiful command of the language. Just to read a few. In 1860, he was a member of the Democratic Territorial Convention in Omaha, a year before the Civil War broke out. He said the following: "It is not necessary for a Frenchman to promise fidelity to the Stars and Stripes. Lafayette's memory and the French blood spilled for the independence of this beautiful country is a guarantee." One of his earlier notable quotes. This is what he said when the 97th Illinois mustered out. "Farewell, men of the 97th. He said, broken the ties that for 3 long years have united us together. The moment to separate has arrived. Our task is done. The honor of our country is vindicated. Our glorious union has been preserved intact, and the struggle is ended." And just a couple of more. He had a lot of respect for the American fighting. He had this to say during the Spanish-American War: "There is no soldier in the world like the American volunteer. You can take raw material in this country and in 3 months do as much in the creation of an army of trained soldiers as they could do in continental European countries in a year. The American volunteers go at things with advantage. It would open the eyes of a European drill master to get hold of a squad of our boys. He would then find what stuff is an American army." And finally, shortly before his death, he said the following, thinking very poetic words: "The old tent is campaign warm. It will scarce longer protect from winter sun. But the good commander will provide another, already pitched on the eternal camping ground. I will be there to welcome you. You will know my quarters, you will see the flag, you will hear the bugle's familiar music, not sounding the rally or the charge, but proclaiming the glad tidings of eternal peace and joy. Then goodbye, my friends." Just an idea of the facility with the language. Interesting too, maybe a final point. When you look at his life, he was one to back the underdog. Not for personal profit, but simply for helping them out. And I think that he noted 3 or 4 examples of it. He would have formed regiments of blacks during the war to enable them to fight the war themselves. And we know by doing so, they were able to garner a lot of social and political ammunition later. So he would have done that. He would have helped the Spanish or the Cubans during the Spanish-American War, the Irish with the Fenian movement, and the Chinese, as it turns out, in Latin America. So we seem to have an eye out for the oppressed or those who might be threatened. Well, any questions? I've gone through the slides somewhat quickly, but are any questions or comments? Native sense.
Yeah, I was wondering. The French company was born in Belgium.
Yeah, born of French parents.
I've been misled all the time. I didn't know it was Belgium, France.
And when you think about it, Belgium at this time was under the control of the French for the most part. Before it, well, actually Belgium was just made a separate country, made into a separate nation 6 years before he won. So a great deal of French influence and population. Gilman,
What nationality was it?
they also Belgium. Yeah. They had come over, her family had come over shortly, I believe, after Vifquain's, well, they would have come over before this first trip. They came to Louisiana in the early 1830s. And she was born in Louisiana in 1838. So she was 2 years younger than Victor Vifquain.
What was the location of the farm?
Here, what I understand, it was on the west loop.
When did he get promoted to general? Was that at the Spanish-American War?
No, he was given the rank of brevet brigadier general after he won the Medal of Honor. And then during the Spanish-American War, he's back to the rank of colonel because he's just staying the rank.
What is
He's given the rank. Brevet is pretty much everything but the pay. He's given the honor of the rank, but not the full stature of the rank. So many officers were being killed at this time during the war because they dreaded it, what they called dreaded it a lot of them. So simply wrote in the rank, sort of like action, thinking like that, an action captain, an action captain in World War I. Unfortunately, the captain was under the shell.
Did he support his family by his military income, or was he home enough to farm? What did his family have?
Yeah, actually, his wife did her best to eke out a living, and later on, he would pretty much support the family by other ventures, newspaper, whatever. Any others? Yeah, her life. And when you think about it, the sons, daughters ended up, many in Lincoln, one in Iowa, but Victor Emmanuel was the only one here.
I didn't walk on that church there.
Oh, okay.
But General Banks is well known there. There's a square name. And there's also, in the local museum, I think, the specimen of the servant for the war, which, if I remember correctly, suggests he wasn't much of a pilot because of the
In fact, later on, this one would criticize them
No kidding.
for not being much of a yeah.
The historian in Balltown was happy to get that, confirmation of his conclusion.
Yeah, we just said he really couldn't, he wasn't aggressive.
Here's a little
Greatest
history.
That's on the school that was in the Vifquain area.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I've read of it.
And that school is a part of Naples now. There's also District 1 schoolhouse in East Naples, which preserves it. But the original was a mile west on the blue and it was a log cabin.
No, it wasn't. It was just across the road from where it had been for so many years. On the Kemper Farm, on the northeast corner of the Kemper Farm. And it's in the Kemper history, it's in the church of, the history of the Westview Church, and it's on the other 80 of where I live now. Yes, I love that.
Jeff,
Yes. Jan?
The Saline County teachers and county superintendent a few years ago published a book of the history of all the Saline County rural schools. And it's very thorough history. It includes a lot of side looks at Saline County. However, the history of District 1, which we know as Star School, says that this first school started in a building on the Vifquain farm, and then in the same sentence goes on and talks about an area that includes 8 sections. Now, it's easy to read that sentence and think Vifquain's farm included those 8 sections. But that is not really what that sentence is saying. The school district started holding school in a building on the Vifquain farm. Later, when they built the Star School, or the preceder of the building that we know as Star School, that was not on the Vifquain farm, but the district of District 1 was those 8 sections that are mentioned in that history. So what it says is easy to misunderstand, and yet it's a good explanation of the 2 different sites that were both different stages of District 1.
Well, the Kemper Farm was bought from the Bellman, Sarah. So, and in the history of the Kemper Farm, it says that it's on that corner. And they also have church school, or church in that building before Westview Church was built.
I copied that from that Saline County report.
You want to read it?
You know, it's something that was interesting, telling people about it. If I'm not correct,
Do you want me to read it? It says, District 1 began as a log cabin school on the Vifquain farm in 1864-65 with Molly Hess as teacher. Teachers received 20 to 30 a month. The terms were divided into several parts, often with different teachers throughout the term. Sometimes as many as 30 pupils were in attendance. They were permitted to attend up to 21 years of age. Church was held here also. Church, they were,
Stand over there.
okay, they were permitted to attend up to 21 years of age. Church was held here also. In 1875-76, the mill levy was raised to be used to build a new schoolhouse. It was built in 1880 and valued at $474. The present building was erected in 1916. It is still in use with 2 pupils attending. It was still in use, okay. They were John Werwolf and Lawrence and Marilyn.
you don't have to read that part.
Okay.
It's held school until 1994.
Jeff, and I'm going to add a little bit about the West Blue Church, because the
Okay.
Vifquains also owned land in Seward County. And when the West Blue Church built their church and cemetery, that land was previously owned by the Vifquains, and he donated half of it, and they paid him $40 for the other half or something like that. And that did not include the land which was known as the parsonage, which was a later purchase, and I think that is either Kemper or Welch that owned it at that time.
Well, it was originally given to the when Grandpa Welch came as the pastor, he bought that section. And,
The rest of the
and he donated about 10 acres back, or 7 acres back to the church.
Any other thoughts on the local? Or questions or comments on any aspect of General Vifquain's life or descendants? Well, Norman?
General comment.
Norman's over here.
A general comment, you were the lawyer, and a comment on who got the history. In this time, you had relatively few people who had college education, or the experience that you get just by having a lot of initiative, which is why people like that had more responsibility in general technology of doing all sorts of different things. Sure. The growth of that sort of thing is an interesting thing I'd love to have you as a historian comment upon.
I think it's very true. What Victor Vifquain did was, in a sense, he was kind of all-purpose individual, a Renaissance man, someone we would not find today, I think, in society because so many of those bridges have been crossed. So much of the early work has been done, but in his time, it was there to be done, so he could, go on his adventure to try to capture Jefferson Davis. And he could join the Fenians and come home, get into politics.
And you saw the newspapers, right? Not newspapers yet, in the place is growing like mad.
That's right. I think that's a good point. 130, 40 years ago, those avenues were there. They have increasingly been closed, I think, to all but the most daring, or people who would have the time.
Well, not only that, but we keep doing more things in the modern world. There is a statue on the national capital dedicated to Robert A. Taft, who you can argue perhaps is the greatest American senator ever lived because he is the last one ever to read every single bill that came before the United States Senate he was serving and have a good enough understanding of it so that any senator of either party could come to Bob Taft and get a quick summary of what this bill contains. It would be completely accurate and unprejudiced. Nobody can do it nowadays because he got too damn much material, not even blaming the guy as Bob Taft. But that is the kind of thing that was happening, which is an example of the different environments you have in the frontier. Look, 1854 you become a territory, 1867 you become a state, 1871 the town of Dillon putting railroads through and getting Dillon College founded the next year. And you're just growing up like mad.
Part of every, in a sense, it really, the territory was still a land of adventure when he got back here after the Civil War and for the next 10 years. It continues to bring settlers into the Republican Valley all the way out to the Colorado border. All of this was still going on.
And it attracts the kind of settlers from Europe who are above all the ones more willing to take a chance.
Right.
And that's why you get that sort of thing. You get the American volunteers and the American soldiers credited for in World War I and World War II. Remember that big breakthrough in Remington in World War II? Because the sergeant disobeyed explicit orders. And his lieutenant backed him up, and the general said, damn good idea.
And talking to some of the relatives, descendants of General Vifquain, I often think that he could have had a very nice life of luxury and ease back in Europe. But he decides to come over here as a young man at age 16, and then to come over later, where he had what it took to survive and do well, but it certainly wasn't advanced, but he could have been a part of the military, the church, back home where he was. He would have been a relatively less stressful life, to say the least, but like so many others, he made like
in 1848, 1849, it soon became politically possible to do so, and these are people betraying the restraint they had beforehand.
Well, they certainly showed a beautiful area. settle. Anything else? Oh, Norma.
Okay, any more questions? Keep passing the sign-in sheets around. There's a box with some pens and pencils in it, sheets of paper about this size. If you want to write nice things, like get to one of those boxes. And you can just turn your paper upside down and leave it here somewhere, we'll find it. We do want to thank Jeff. Anybody who's younger than I am is a kid, and I'll call them by their first name. Anybody who's older than I am, that's Grandpa and Grandma. So Jeff is younger by quite a few days, so we'll call him Jeff. After we finish here, in the main building, which is the one that way, out that door, we'll have coffee and cookies, lemonade and tea. So you go in and you help yourselves. I want to announce anybody that has donated any time or labor to the museum would you please stand. That's our volunteers. Come on. Dennis contributed a computer and he programmed it for us, so we're in the throes of learning, you know.
And one of